welcome to the Thinking About Computers podcast, where we talk about thinking about computers. Our guest today, Justin Jaffray, software engineer at Datadog in New York City, a former research engineer at Berkeley, and the author of a popular databases newsletter called Null Bitmap with up to 10,000 subscribers. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad that we agreed on the 10,000 number ahead of time.
We should have upped it, but
yeah, maybe it might have been. We could have gone a little more ambitious, maybe, but I think 10,000 is like in the realm of believability.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
do you know the landscape of the competition in the database newsletter space? Are there, what's the top of the game?
I think there's like a couple. I mean, there's an assorted group of people who like write kind of regularly, I think, about databases. I mean, I feel like it's kind of hard to even define like newsletter at this point. It's kind of like blog that has an email subscription feature, at least the way I use it. But there's a couple other ones. There's one called Materialized View that I like, and he kind of talks about he talks a lot about like cloud storage and like actual like news, as opposed to mine, which is kind of just like whatever I'm thinking about at the moment. And whatever kind of like vehicles I can find for stupid jokes. I think as far as like other people who do like pretty regular writing, Murat Demirbas, I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right, but he does like a kind of weekly post where he writes a lot about like database papers and distributed systems papers, which is really great. And I think the other person that kind of in that sphere that jumps to mind is like Jamie Brandon. I don't know if you're familiar with his writing. But he does a lot of like kind of regular like databasey stuff. But I think, I don't know, saying them all out loud, they're all like pretty different, I would say. They all kind of have a different vibe, which I guess is good.
Yeah. You're the only newsletter that I subscribe to, but I like the
that's
vibe.
Great.
Very, very light.
The only newsletter funny. Period? You don't even get money stuff?
Two. Yours and money stuff. The money stuff of databases and the money stuff of finance.
Great. That's what I would like to. That's good company.
Yeah.
What is money stuff?
Money stuff is, so there's this writer at Bloomberg named Matt Levine who I would consider among my like chief inspirations. Where he does a daily newsletter about like finance stuff, but it's kind of like, it's not really like news in the sense that you necessarily read it to be informed as much as you read it to be like entertained. And he kind of, I think it's like a very inspiring like kind of take on like what writing about like factual things can be, and that he takes a very like kind of perspective of like this stuff is all like really funny, and like you should read about it because it's really funny, and like not necessarily because it's like gonna impact your life necessarily, but it's like it's so dramatic, and there's all these like fun characters, and he's like a very exceptional writer, and you can tell he's just like, you can like really sense his like enjoyment of the topics he's writing about in it, and he's just like, yeah, I think he's just kind of the GOAT when it comes to like turning kind of technical topics into like entertaining writing. Definitely recommend. They just started a podcast too, which is just kind of like a summary of the week's stuff, which is also very, very good.
Yeah, I haven't checked out the podcast yet, but love the newsletter. Yeah, really, really good.
If you read the newsletter, then like it's not going to be like much new, but you do get to listen to Matt's like kind of deep, goofy voice.
Do you consume any other newsletters that aren't like software engineering stuff?
That aren't software engineering stuff? I mean, definitely money stuff is like the main one. There's a couple like video game news ones that I read, but nothing in the vein of like the kind of like a personal like, here's some stuff I'm thinking about things. I have some friends who write some like personal like private ones that I read regularly, but that's kind of it.
So what is Datadog?
I don't know if I'm like authorized to like give a pitch on what Datadog is, so I will invite like our marketing department or whatever. But it's basically like a serverless kind of monitoring platform for like time series metrics and logs and all kinds of other stuff. So you kind of just like ship us off your applications, metrics and data, and we let you make like pretty dashboards and index it all for you. So it's kind of like a SaaS kind of, you might use it for like, at a very simplified level, you might use it for the kinds of things that you might use like Grafana or Prometheus for.
Okay.
Yeah, I started at Datadog like about a year and a half ago. I work on our like metrics kind of storage system. So basically any of the like, if you ever open a dashboard in Datadog or you run any kind of query against your recent metrics data, that's served by my team.
And so I don't know too much about what you worked on when you were a research scientist at Berkeley. How similar is it?
It's completely different, I would say.
Okay.
both in like technical content and also like vibes, I guess. I mean, I'm sure Connor's like familiar with all this, but we worked on, when I was working with Connor's team at Berkeley, we were working on this system called HydroFlow, which was kind of this very like speculative system to like build a way to make it easier to kind of design like cloud applications, starting from like a level of like, when I was there, we were mostly focused on the distributed kind of like data flow layer, where things would like kind of just communicate through these algebraic objects, and use that to like send messages to each other. I still follow the repo a little bit. It looks like that's still being worked on, but it does seem like some people have kind of graduated on to like building the next layer on top of it. I don't know if that's a fair characterization, Connor.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Do you ever just like peruse some of the pull requests just to like see what's going on?
I snoop, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's one of my favorite things of like, if I'm, don't really have any gossip for that week and I just like want to find stuff, I'll go to popular repos of like really popular academic projects and I'll look at the GitHub issues.
And you see like, see which ones sound like particularly passive aggressive, and you like...
Yeah, like there are some GitHub issues, almost every single repo.
Yeah.
I think regardless of the quality of the project, there's at least one GitHub issue that is, I cannot recreate these results. And it's like, one is like fine, but then there are some that like really get like, some of them is just like, I run this command and like it's not working. But then other people, their pull request is like basically a whole like roast of like, I tried all these different things, it doesn't work. I think that like you have this bug in your code and that's why you got the results. Like,
so this is not even passive aggressive.
No, it's just aggressive.
Yeah, it's just aggressive.
Yeah, there's some like passive aggressive ones of like popular repos where people will like say some, like where are the checkpoints, and then like 20 people will just keep adding +1s to it, which I think is pretty nice.
See, this is what I mean. This is what Matt Levine does for like the finance world. Is he looks past the like, here's what people are saying, and like finds like the drama of it.
Yeah.
And it's so exciting. And you could have this big like chart on your wall of all the people who have beef with each other in the research world.
So true. Yeah.
That's what this podcast could pivot to.
Just research drama.
Yeah. That's what the people want.
Yeah, that would be good. We have a segment every time that's just going through GitHub repos. See if we can find any like just trolls on GitHub, I guess.
Yeah.
Cool.
Or even in papers,
Yeah. Yeah. I will say, one of my favorite, there's this guy, I forget, like Lucid Reigns or something. He's like the guy on GitHub for ML stuff. He'll like re-implement the most popular papers. Everyone uses implementations to a point where like he will make empty GitHub repos for things that he's working on. And like I remember one time he did it, and there were like pull requests that were like, "Oh, I can't run this" or something. And he responded, and he's like, "Yeah, it's like basically an empty repo. I have no idea why it has this many stars. Like nothing is runnable." I thought that was very funny.
That's great. So what are you working on nowadays, Connor? Are you working on like HydroFlow stuff?
Yeah, in Hydro stuff. Yeah. So I just submitted a paper on like generalizing the Calm theorem stuff around coordination freeness, and I've been working on a library for supporting checking algebraic properties of Rust code. So you can think of it as like letting you annotate properties that an optimizer can use to, do query rewriting, but for non-native operators.
In Vibes, so you said the work that you do now is very different in like Vibes or in like environment, and also in what the actual job is.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Actually, this is actually something I wanted to ask you both about, because I've like, since like I've not been in the like research world, I've kind of come up with like I've developed some like opinions on like what distinguishes it kind of from like the industry world, and maybe why some people are like drawn to one or the other. And so my current kind of take is like, I think if you want to like do research, it seems to me like you need to have some like very strong convictions about things which are true. And some of this opinion was like formed from talking to May a bit, May Milano. But it seems to me like the kinds of people who are like very successful in research are people who like have some intuition or some idea or some like core belief that like something is true, and like they're willing to spend a lot of time proving that it's true, even like in the absence of like intermediate kind of like assurance that that's true. Like you kind of have to be able to take a lot of faith. And I think something I learned about myself while I was like doing research was that I think I'm kind of bad at that. Like I think that's a skill that I don't have. Whereas like in industry, there's a much more emphasis on like doing things kind of incrementally, and like once you have kind of like a working thing, like kind of improving it by bit, and like you can like improve these costs a little bit here and there. But it kind of seems to me that that sort of thing is almost like at odds with the very like idea of research, because like industry has so much money and they're so like open to this thing where we can kind of take these incremental steps and like improve things incrementally, that if a project is like able to be done that way, then it will just be done in industry. And so the things that like need to be done in academia are like these like kind of long shots that like you need these people with like really strong convictions who like believe their beliefs really strongly to like do them. And I think I kind of learned that that's like not really me. But I'd be curious to hear if you two have that like same kind of, for a different perspective on that.
Yeah, so I do agree that I think that I was talking with some people about this the other day. There's like what is it? Like the hedgehog and the fox. Honestly, I forget the analogy. But basically there are people who have like very strong convictions that are weakly held, or whatever the saying is. Like there are some people where it's like you really got to have this strong idea of like, no, this is true. And
so there is a parable about this, as you're telling me.
Yes, there's a parable. Okay, you know what? I need to look it up. Now it's like hedgehog in the... Okay. It's...
Do you also know about this, Connor?
No, parable? I can't wait to learn.
Yeah.
And you could tell us anything. They'd be like, and there's a parable, I promise. And like, we'd have to believe.
So true. Okay. Google sucks. I'm going to go to ChatGPT.
Yeah, this is actually like... This is just like the seashell and the hermit crab. When they're like looking for a parable.
Okay. So hedgehogs, individuals who view the world through the lens of a single defining idea. So the focus deeply on one overarching vision that they apply to interpret different things. And then foxes are ones that have like a wide array of ideas without being confined to like one single vision. So we were talking about how there are some, depending on the phase of the project that you are in, you should either be a hedgehog or you should be a fox. In general, though, I do think that in academia, you do need this like level of delusion, I would call it, of you want to, in research, make some sort of new discoveries or, you know, expand the field in a somewhat significant way. And how, like, a way to do this is you need like a strong idea that kind of goes against either what people currently think or some idea that people just haven't really thought of. And to prove this would be incredibly hard, like to prove this super rigorously. So you kind of have to somewhat go on faith while you're working on the project. Prove it as best as you can, but like I feel like oftentimes it's never satisfying. Like you need to have some intuition that you think will work, and you are looking for things to confirm this intuition, but like not. Yeah, I don't.
No, I mean that makes sense.
I think what you described as like the kind of what research is like is what certain kinds of research projects are like. Like the Hydra project was like a very, very big and long-term vision that, yeah, like will take many, many years to execute, and like you have to kind of take it on faith for maybe a significant amount of that time. There's like a lot of research projects are like, you know, 6 months end to end, and so it's like not that crazy to take on faith that that idea might work, and like it might fail 1 month in, or you might 6 months in like confirm your hypothesis. So like I think that style of research are like I don't know, they're like riskier bets. Like you're not like
That's not everything.
I think like just like shorter length risky bets is like a form of research where like you'll I don't know, like have a hunch and you'll try it out, but you'll be able to convince yourself that it's right or wrong in a short enough amount of time that it like doesn't.
Yeah.
You don't need that much faith in yourself, I think. Like, and you'll like sometimes be wrong, and like you'll be like, okay, that's fine. Like as long as I feel like I'm right 80% of the time, like that's okay.
I do think there's something though about like this is something I struggled a lot with research in the beginning, where you have some strong idea, or you know, you have some idea. I have 6 months. I want to prove that, you know, this idea is true. I think a lot of people are really uncomfortable with like, and you're just gonna take me on that? Like, you know, what if I'm wrong? What if the experiments that I have are set up wrong? Like, I remember being like, what if my code is wrong? Like, I don't know why you all are believing me on this. And I guess I know a fair amount of people who are really uncomfortable with this, like, level of, I mean, I do think that there is much more of a level of faith in academia, right? You trust papers, sometimes based on, like, who's writing them, but you're not, like, looking at all their code. Whereas in industry, I think it's a bit clearer on, like, whether something works or not, because you need to ship it to production. So, like,
yeah,
I would suspect that you want to make safer bets, and you also want to spend more time, like, verifying that the changes that you make are actually good.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm interested. So do you both have like, I'm curious, like, do you both have like any of these like big ideas that you kind of like find your research like revolves around, or that you're like kind of making these like short or medium or long-term bets on?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do, but it's not like a hot take. I feel like it was a somewhat hotter take a few years ago, but yeah, I mean, I guess I fall on the spectrum of like, in machine learning, data is everything, and like large models will probably be doing many things in the future, and so we should just embrace that future now. And like essentially machine learning should just go back to being data analysis. People should stop kidding themselves that there's a lot of like cool architectural things to do, and realize that if you're going for utility, like you are a data engineer and you need to accept this.
You don't think that sounds like a hot take? Is that I don't know this world that much, but the way you described it just now sounds like.
Yeah, I think I'm phrasing it in a more inflammatory way. Because that's just some of my personal frustration. It's like when CS people like adamantly admit that they are not software engineers. And this is true for some people. Like I would say that if you're working in theory or things like that, you're not a software engineer. But I think that, you know, people have this notion of what they think the field is, and I think that they're kidding themselves. So, but yeah, I mean, I think the general idea that like data is, you know, a very large, probably the biggest piece in machine learning is pretty widely accepted now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't think I have any convictions. I think I'm actually pretty unopinionated. You know, I would say like the themes in my research are mostly like I see like a certain set of tools that I like that are like kind of new, and like apply them to problems. Like right now, like tools from algebra, like applying them to making data processing better.
I like that stuff too.
Yeah, and like, you know,
I'm always telling the people at work that our system is over semi-groups, and they always tell me to shut up.
You just need to go harder. See, you have a conviction.
I guess I do have a conviction, yeah. It's that we should make this more opaque.
Yes.
Yeah, so I like.
No, go for it.
No, I was gonna say, like, I think you and I are kind of aligned on that, Connor. Where like I think the kind of like I think it would be cool if more like everyday kind of software engineering adopted some like I don't know. I don't want to get too far into the like formal methods stuff. That's not really where my like beliefs lie, but like using math as like a tool to describe like things we already have, like I think is like pretty powerful and interesting. I guess maybe this comes back to like one of the things I believe and that I like feel like I want to try and get across with Null Bitmap is like you know, you kind of understand a lot of ideas. Like if you're just like a kind of working programmer, you probably understand a lot of the ideas that like exist in research and like that people are talking about and like things that people are interested in. But it's like couched in like just a completely different set of vocabulary.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think if I sat down like someone who understands how a log structured merge tree works and asked them to like describe what properties you need to have for like a value to be like a valid like entry in a log structured merge tree, they would like re-implement or like they would rederive like the definition of like an abelian semigroup or whatever. But if you say it like that, then it sounds terrifying and people think you're trying to like make them, you know, do Haskell or something.
Yeah, I think like there's a big gap between like the language people use in academic papers and like what practitioners would want to read. I think like it's like the state of academic papers is kind of unfortunate. Like they're written for a super narrow audience, arguably just the 3 people reviewing it. Like the incentives are not there to make them easier to understand or like self-contained in a way where you like include background that would be needed.
Yeah.
Written for people who have read the 15 papers leading up to them already. And it's like,
that's an interesting way to put it.
In the language of the field already.
That reminds me because like when, you know, a friend of mine, because I started blogging a couple of years ago, and a friend of mine had like asked me, he was like, how do you like come up with these ideas for these things? And there's like a lot of answers to that, I think. But I think one of like the easiest ways is to like, if this is like this is what I did because this is kind of where my like interest and skill sets lie. But I think one easy way to like find stuff to write about is to like, take research papers and like kind of bring them into the world of software engineering, or take software engineering and bring it into the world of like, here's this common idea explained in like maybe a more formal or like complex way. And like kind of bridging that gap is like, I think there's it's like super fertile.
Yes.
For like anyone who like wants to get into that kind of thing. Because like you said, the papers are like writing for like a very specific purpose. It's like everyone who's looking at this knows, like has probably read like all the things that it's referencing. And like, it's not a question of like, they're like blind to this. They're like, they understand that like, the average person can't understand this. And it's just because like there's no incentive for them to write a thing that does address those. And in fact, it would, if they were trying to address that, it would probably make the work worse for what they're trying to do. Which is why there's like space for kind of other people to jump in and be like, here's my kind of contribution to that thing.
Yeah, and I think it's great people trying to do the translation. Like, I don't know, I've been meaning to blog and like explain my research in different ways for actually, like, I've been meaning to do it for so long, and every time I get your newsletter in my mailbox, I'm reminded like another week that I didn't do it. Like, I'm still just like not.
Do you want to do a
blogging.
guest post? You want to be a featured blogger on Null Bitmap?
Sure. All right. This could be.
All right. We'll talk. This
could be that first hit to get me into blogging. Yeah, and I think it's great. It's like true that I think the incentives in academia aren't quite set up for like spending a lot of time making stuff more accessible. I was talking to some folks in the theory community recently. They were talking about like there's very little Wikipedia content on database theory.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like we had a bunch of database theorists in Berkeley for this Simon's Institute session on database theory. And like there's hundreds of Wikipedia articles that should exist that aren't written, that like the people in that room could write. And it was like, well, it'd be great to have them. We could write them, but of course then we're not writing papers.
Yeah.
So like, how do you incentivize this? And one person proposed actually like giving an award at conferences for like the best non-paper contributions, like the kind of like, I don't know what you'd call it, like community outreach or like accessible writing or something. Which I think is a great idea for like how to incentivize people to do more of that. There's a lot of it that needs to be done.
I feel like that kind of comes back to my thoughts about like the kinds of people who get into research. Like, do you think like what proportion of people do you think who are like really into like doing research and stuff feel like energized by the thought of doing that research, by doing that kind of outreach, that kind of like translation? Do you think there's like a lot of people, like, do you think that's an archetype of person that exists? Yeah,
I mean, I think like the kind of people who really like teaching like undergrads is probably like there's some decent amount of overlap with that, but I don't know. It's maybe just less rewarding to post it on the internet and not like see in person the people who are learning from it. It's like harder to get that dopamine hit than if you just like explained it to someone in person in a classroom or something.
Right. I mean, I guess this is why people write like textbooks and stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, specifically on the topic of like database theory, it seems like there's very little like stuff out there at all. Like even kind of like inaccessible stuff, or I don't know. There's like the one textbook from like 30 years ago. And then there's that one that's in progress that you showed me, I think. Which I find very strange because it's like, it's a really cool area. Like it's really interesting and fun. And like, particularly I think from like a recreational perspective, if you're like not a kind of professional, like database theory researcher, I think it's still like one of those things that's really fun to read about.
It's funny that there's like not more content that's accessible on it, since it is ostensibly like a very applicable branch of theory. Like it's specifically about databases, a massive industry with many people working on them. And like
how many people online are like crazy about type theory, like have like type theory in their Twitter bio and like post on GitHub issues being like, this violates the value restriction or something, and like, where are all those people for database theory?
That's a great point. Yeah, there really are. There's so many like type theory nerds on the internet.
Yeah, they all have anime profile pictures, and they're all like, they all live in Scotland. And,
yeah, I wonder what. Like, I feel like there are a fair amount of these like micro communities in like academia or CS that are just like real gung ho.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good question. I don't know. Maybe you could turn it around. You could bring database theory to the masses.
Yeah, that's what we have to do, Connor. That's got to be the quest.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, like databases has some marketing problems. Like you look at like the Berkeley database group, they call it the Data Systems and Foundations group because a database is not a sexy term these days. I think like it really evokes 1970s mainframe sort of feelings for people, even though like the topics of the community are like at the center of all data processing, right? Which is very popular.
Wait, one second.
What do you think about the term databases? Would you?
I love databases. I feel like, wait, what is this?
No one who has ever opened this book got what they expected. Was that Foundations of Databases by like Abitable, Hall, and Vianu? Like, there were people who were like pleasantly surprised, and there were people who were like unpleasantly surprised when they opened this book. But like, no one got what they expected.
That's like the Bible of database theory, like the one book on database theory.
It's like you open it up, and it's like the hyperplane technique used in the preceding proof is based on the like no one who opens a book about databases kind of expects that, I think. And I think that's what you're saying. It's like a branding problem. It's like, I think the people who would be really interested in this stuff don't think to open this book. And there's people who are like, I want to write a B tree, and they open this and they're like, what the hell is this?
Database theory is also bogged down in like a lot of syntax that I think doesn't need to be there, but it like every paper starts with like all these definitions of like the schema and the active domain and all this stuff, and just like introduces a ton of terminology.
Yeah,
like, you could kind of just like vibes your way through that sort of stuff and be like, yeah, we've got sets.
Yeah,
sets of tuples. It's like a fixed number of elements per tuple.
Yeah.
This is something the ML community's gotten down. Like,
how so? I'm actually very curious to hear.
Yeah, so this is just a theory. But like, I find many ML papers pretty easy to parse, and I don't think it's just because like I am in the field. Like, they are written, I think, to be accessible to a much broader audience than like a systems paper or I'm sure a theory paper, because ML is really hot and a lot of people are reading this. And I think also crucially, because we have a bit of a reviewer crisis, the people who are reviewing your paper are not like professors who have been in the field forever. They are first year PhDs or sometimes even undergraduates who have written, one draft paper that has maybe gotten rejected or something. And
that's super interesting though. Like, if you have much less experienced reviewers, then you'll write more accessible papers because the papers are written for the reviewers.
So do you find this? I'm curious, like, you as someone who's like experienced in this field, do you find this like a detriment? Like, presumably at some point with some like level of familiarity, you would rather them like gloss over all the details and like the foundations and stuff.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trade-off. Like, on one hand, it's really nice for quickly scanning through like papers. Like, it's really easy to get the TLDR. I think it sometimes removes a bit of the magic. It can be fun to think of like, why like mathematically this works. When the paper's more just presents it as like, this is the incredibly high level intuition and like these are the results. So I think from an implementation point of view, it's actually not bad. Like, I feel like it's almost even easier from an implementation point of view. Yeah. So I think in general it's overall good. But it certainly does lead to, like, you feel marketed to a bit more, like, sometimes things are a bit murky on, like, is this, like, you found something, it gets higher numbers, you provided a little bit of intuition as to why this is the case, but it's less, like, it doesn't feel quite as, like, satisfying sometimes from, like, I totally believe that this is why this is happening. But in general, from, like, a readability point of view, I think it is, like, heavily favored to if you introduce, like, a crap ton of notation from the beginning.
That's super interesting.
I met very few people who like things that start with a lot of notation. Very, very few.
Yeah.
Because even if you don't mind notation, like, you're going to read through all this notation before you realize, like, oh, actually, this is a bad idea in the first place. Like, you know.
Yeah. It's like you open up, like, a math textbook or whatever, and there's a chapter on set theory, and you're like, this is great. I can do this. And then, like, after that, it gets, like, much too difficult. and you're like, oh, I'm actually, like, 5 years and maybe a degree off from being able to read this book.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I just need to be warned. Like, I'm totally fine with a lot of notation, but, like, you really need to set the context that, like, this is a notation-heavy thing. And I think what is really frustrating is when people introduce a ton of notation, and then it doesn't really matter. Or, like, something that really bothers me is, like, when papers spend a really long time, like, introducing all this complex notation, and then you spend, like, an hour trying to figure out what exactly it is they're doing, and then you realize, like, it's something incredibly simple, but they just, like, it's like, you know, like, they needed to fill the 10-page limit, and so they just, like, wrote down a ton of random shit that doesn't matter.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just like you said, there's, like, you know, there's, like, space for, like, because, like, maybe at some level, this, like, level of precision is warranted to, like, actually cover, like, exactly what you want to say, but, you know, there's, like, another context for saying, like, 85% of it with, like, you could say with, like, 10% of the precision.
Yeah.
Do you, like, think a lot about writing styles and how to communicate these, like, you know, technical or complex ideas to different audiences? Like, are you out there reading different textbooks thinking, like, yeah, I really like art and style, like, Dummett doesn't know what he's doing?
I mean, I definitely do have my own preferences. I can't say that I, like, consciously kind of pull from, like, different sources. My kind of style is, like, say what, like, makes sense to me, and then assume that explanation will work for some people and not for others, and I don't, like, try to micro optimize it too much. But I mean, I do have some, like, I think I'm sure that this is kind of like a classic, I think, but if you've read the Philip Bernstein concurrency control and recovery in database systems, I think it's just, like, one of the best, like prose, like, technical explanations of, like, fairly dense topics out there. And I think that's, like, probably had a big influence on me, although I'm not sure I could point to, like, specific ways that that's true. Yeah, I don't know. I think a friend of mine who does a lot of teaching, who's actually a postdoc at Berkeley, he shared with me once this, like, thing, his, like, thoughts on, specifically, he was talking about, like, choosing examples for teaching students. And he, you know, he had all these thoughts about it, how, like, it should be, like, sort of representative of a thing, like, not so specific that it doesn't give you the full intuition, but not so general that, like, you have to, like, kind of be, you kind of have to grasp the entirety of the thing you're talking about to, like, for it to be a useful, like, simplification of what you're talking about. And I think a lot of it's just like kind of vibes. But I think that, you know, a lot of it's like threading that needle of like how general and how specific you're being when you're writing things. But I think that was another big like influence on me, is just like the way that he kind of intentionally thought about that stuff.
It's just like, yeah, your medium, you have a lot of freedom in style. Like, yeah, because academic papers, like there is variation in style, but I think you're like adding a lot of risk of just getting kind of desk rejected for not following the standard format. Kind of.
Totally.
Like, you know, like Andy Pablo, like, you know, works jokes into his papers and like his titles are funny, but like, you know.
Right, only so far he can go. Yeah. Yeah, and also the fact that like this is just like a hobby I have, and like if I write something that everyone hates, that's like completely fine. Like there was a Null Bitmap a couple months ago, I guess, maybe like 6 months ago, that I've always really loved. The gimmick was that it was like a chapter of a fictitious sequel to The Little Schemer, but about like query planning, and I really liked it. I don't think anyone else liked it, but that's kind of like the great part about doing this kind of thing as a hobby instead of like as your job, is that you can write something that like is just for you, and that's okay.
Yeah. Do you get feedback much from your 10,000 subscribers? Like, do people reply and they're like, wow, like terrible this week, like stop talking about this thing, or like
yeah, not really. People don't really respond that much to stuff. I sometimes will get texts from people who think like from my friends who thought something was funny, and that's like overwhelmingly the most like feedback I get on things. So, you know, it's still just kind of vibes on like, I think it's pretty hard to get any like actual data on like what is resonating with people and like what is like actually valuable for people. So, you know, that's kind of why the thing I'm optimizing for is like, am I writing something that I think is like fun and entertaining and like the kind of thing that I'm happy to be putting out, more than like, is this like a valuable educational tool? Like I think of the educational aspect of it as like, you know, people describe it as an educational thing sometimes, and to me that's definitely secondary to like writing something that is entertaining and like has some kind of like I don't want to say like artistic value, but it's like it's a bit of me doing like some creative expression more than it is me like trying to explain topics. Have you seen the show like How To with John Wilson?
Yeah, I love that show.
Yeah, there's like, I think it's the trailer for it where he's like describing the premise of the show, and he's like, you know, my show is like a how-to show, except you don't really learn very much.
Yeah, I think coming from like entertaining first is probably good, because if you want it to be content that isn't very effortful for people to consume, then like it has to be entertaining first.
Yeah, I actually have a strong opinion about this, which is that I think a lot of people think, I think more people put entertainment first than like admit that to themselves. Because I look at like a lot of blog posts on the internet, and most of them I read, and a lot of them I can tell like they're being written with the intent of like imparting some like deep idea to me. And usually the average blog post, the most I get out of it is like kind of a nug of like information. And I think I'm kind of the opinion that like real like deeply like learning stuff kind of comes through struggle and like doing exercises and like doing things wrong and like really like kind of grinding through something. And I'm not convinced that that's how people are engaging with blog posts in the first place. I don't know if that's like a hot take or whatever, but
no, I feel like sometimes you read something and it's like, I didn't have to do a lot of work to read it. Like I just read like a paragraph and I was like, damn, like that's a really good point that like changed the way I think about this. Right. And like, I didn't have to work through examples or like try some different thing and have it fail and then have this thing work. Like I'm just like, wow, yeah, like that person's really smart. That's a dope idea. Like gonna start using that.
But one thing you took out of it was that person's really smart.
Yeah.
And yeah. Yeah, I guess that's true. I guess I buy that. Yeah.
But I think there's also a lot of situations, where there's a lot of value in just like the battle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it depends on what you're kind of working on. But yeah, I guess like a big thing, or a big like belief I have with things like Null Bitmap is that like I feel like a lot of people when they do like when they're like, oh, I'm interested in like these topics, or like I'm interested in like research adjacent things, or I'm interested in like kind of applying like math to programming stuff, I feel like the kind of thing that the universe tells you is to like, oh, you should go make that your job, or like you should go like make your whole life about that, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And this is, I guess, some sort of attempt at like putting forth the idea that like that it can be like you can engage with that stuff in like a kind of more casual way, and like a way that's just like a hobby or something, and it can still be like valuable to you and valuable to other people. And I think that's something I feel pretty strongly about with Null Bitmap. And I feel like there's kind of more of a culture of that coming up these days, of like people who are like engaged with that kind of stuff as like a side thing, which I think is really cool and interesting. Yeah, I mean, you were in industry before, Connor. Was that like, what was your like? Did you have that kind of like, I really like this stuff, and so I should like make it my job, or was there like a different kind of thought about it?
And I think, yeah, like deciding to quit my job to do a PhD was kind of in that line of thinking of like, yeah, like I like this stuff, I want to make it my job. I don't think that is the right decision in every case, and it like depends a lot on the kind of stuff. Like, I don't know, like if like you really love category theory, like there's not a lot of jobs doing that, like, mm-hmm. And so, you know, yeah, I don't know, like the marketplace to some extent dictates like what things should be hobbies and what things should be jobs, and like whether it's worth the trade-off in different situations.
Yeah, totally. I'm curious, how did you like decide that this kind of more like researchy side of like computers and stuff was compelling to you? Because I feel like, do you think a lot of people go from like industry to like PhD? I feel like most people I know, it's kind of like a more direct out of school kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know if that's somewhat uncommon. Especially, so like I was in industry for 5 years. I've met very few people who are in industry that long. I meet a lot of, like a decent number of people in the Berkeley PhD really do like a year in industry or something.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I think it's an uncommon direction. Yeah, I mean, for me, I happen to be at Microsoft, which is a very, very large company, which does a lot of research. And so I got to work with researchers and kind of do like a, you know, like part-time on research, 20% sort of thing. And so I, got to kind of test run and see how much I liked research, because it's without pretty compelling evidence that I would like a career in that, like quitting my good job to go move across the country and not make any money to go to grad school would not have been.
Oh, so you did do research while you were at Microsoft, or you did like? Oh, cool. I didn't realize that. That's cool.
So I guess we're coming up at an hour. Maybe we should pivot to just some, you know, I'm trying to think of other good.
Should we talk about Magic the Gathering? I think you're the first guest on the pod as a fellow Magic the Gathering player, and I know the fans are just like dying to hear about how, you know, Magic has influenced your life and your career.
Here's my pre-release deck from the Modern Horizons 3 pre-release.
Hell yeah.
Do you play Magic still, Connor?
I do. I've been vintage cubing lately on Moto.
Oh wow, that's pretty hardcore.
I haven't played Paper in a long time. I haven't owned cards in a long time. And I've been wanting to play Cube in person, but I haven't found folks yet in the Berkeley area. I posted in like a the Berkeley student email list and got no replies. So
Nice. Well, there's a Cube Discord that I think is kind of where people congregate. I bet if you showed up there, you could find groups.
Oh, for in-person cubing groups?
I bet, yeah.
Oh, cool. You should send me that link.
Yeah, I'll send you that link. Yeah, I play a decent amount of Magic, I guess. For a long time, I didn't have all that many people that because the way I got into Magic was my one friend. I got into it for a brief stint, and then got me into it, and then he quit. So I was the only person in my friend group who was playing. So I had to go down to the store a lot to play. But now I have another friend in person who's into it now. So that's a good place to be.
Yeah.
What do you like to draft in Vintage Cube?
Play a lot of blue.
Yeah.
So
you strike me as a guy who likes to draft a twin deck.
I think twin is not in the cube anymore, but yeah, I mean.
Really? I thought don't people love that?
I think people did love it, but it was the power level was kind of low. But I don't know. I mean, I draft good decks, try and win.
Cool.
Probably don't play a whole lot of mono red or mono white.
I love mono red.
Yeah. Do you think we can convince Lisa to get into Magic?
I mean, listen, I feel like I'm not the most. I feel like I could be convinced. But it wouldn't be the easiest thing.
I think it's it's kind of easy to convince a lot of computer people, because you once you learn the basics of the rules and you start reading the cards, you're oh, this is a virtual machine, and I need to know what the instructions are of this virtual machine, and that's the gateway, I think, for a lot of people. It's a pretty okay. Actually, the thing I hate when people talk about Magic and how the game works is when people are oh, Magic the Gathering is turn complete. It's so complex or whatever. And I think that's not the very interesting thing about it. If I think it's cool because it's this weird almost feels like a programming language environment where it's able to rewrite its own rules. The game is constantly rewriting its own rules, and cards change the way that the rules from other cards are even applied, and it really feels this weird programming languagey rebinding, changing all the meanings of variables and stuff on the fly thing that I've seen very little writing about online, and I think that we need to also, this is my other hot take, we need to get rid of this discourse of Magic the Gathering is Turing complete and figure out what the heck kind of programming language is Magic the Gathering. I learned a cool fact about it a while ago in there was this one of the developers of Magic Arena, which is one of the online clients for it, was doing an AMA in some Discord, and I asked him because I wanted to know how the rules engine worked, because I always assumed it would be you take each card and you implement some maybe little data loggy looking thing that describes how that card interacts with the rest of the game, oh, this card does this thing to all the creatures that have this property, but it turns out that's not how it works at all, and they actually have an English language parser for all the card rules that they run on the fly. When you play a card on Magic Arena, it reads the English text to figure out what should happen.
Wow.
Which, isn't that crazy? And then they use some common Lisp expert system library to turn that into actual effects on the game. It's just it's so cool.
That's surprising. Is that because they have 30 years of Magic cards that they want to import, and so they don't want to manually encode the stuff? They just want to take it.
I think that's it. I'm not sure. I mean, I think that's probably the technical argument for it, but on another level, I think having tried to implement these rules multiple times in the past, I have this kind of hunch that maybe this is actually the only way you can do it, because the way the actual rules of the game are defined are in this big very long PDF file, multiple hundreds of pages, comprehensive rules, and that's the canonical document for how the rules of this game work. And those all refer to the English language rules text. Like they don't refer to some like virtual machine thing that like is under the surface. So maybe the only way you can do it in a way that's coherent is like adhering to how the rules on the words on the card read. I don't know. It's something I would like to figure out.
Did you ever work at Wizards, like work in game dev? Does that appeal to you?
I think that's another thing that I slot into the is better as a hobby category for me. I think because I do like game dev. Like I think game dev's cool. I think game design's really cool. But I think it's something I'm more interested in doing. It's like just kind of on the side, and like I don't know. I guess maybe this is like a kind of overarching theme I have of like not everything needs to be your like main thing in life. There's this really great book. Actually, I think I have it.
Do you buy this premise that not everything needs to be your main thing?
Oh yeah, no, totally. I think you should have many things on the side.
So this is like maybe my favorite book of all time. It's called Rise of the Video Game Zinesters by Anna Anthropy, and it's specifically about video games. But I think there's like a lot of kind of general ideas about it that it kind of it posits, and the premise it's from maybe like 2008, I think. But the premise was like about this kind of future of video games where for like many decades other people who made video games were all people in like large corporations who had like large engineering teams because that was what it took to make a video game. And Anna Anthropy was like really interested in this kind of world we entered in like the late 2000s where there were lots of like free online video game making tools, which kind of made it more akin to like more traditional art forms, like where like, you know, people who like work a desk job like go home and like can write a short story, or they go home and like paint a picture. And then there was this like point in time where it became plausible that those people could go home and like make a video game. And I think that's really cool. And I think that's like a very like desirable like way of engaging with the world is like, you know, you have these things that you're like interested in doing, and you have the ability to do them like not as like your main thing. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, seems really
helpful.
helpful.
That's my two book pitches: is concurrency control and recovery in database systems, and
Amazing.
Rise of the Video Game Zinesters.
What riveting reads!
A little past the hour. Do you have any other things you want to share with folks, or like advice you want to give to folks?
Yeah, I have one answer to both questions, which is subscribe to Null Bitmap at buttondown.email/Jaffray, Jaffray.
Brilliant.
Cool.
All right.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. This is great.
Anytime.